whenever we think of a man in history, it's because he was able to sacrifice his own pleasure for a larger purpose.
Yeah.
And obviously Christ is the ultimate example of that. Nobody would say that he was expendable, but he embodies what masculinity is.
One of the differences between men and boys is that boys consume more than they produce, and men produce more than they consume.
The reason why we have this idea that boys mature slower than girls, it's because our societies become so feminized and the expectations are so feminine. So boys just perform worse at the kinds of tasks that girls are naturally more predisposed to, but it's because we've the system's against the guys.
O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined today by Paul from the YouTube channel Manifesto, and of course, Father Michael Butler. I think everybody's going to be familiar with you, sir. You've been on here a few times. And your YouTube channel, Average the Alpha, both of which are tagged in the video title.
Thank you.
And I'll have, I think I just need to add your direct link, Father. I got Paul's in the video description. I'll do that while we're chatting. But anyways, thank you guys for hopping on. Really appreciate you guys being here. How's your day going?
Doing well here. Yeah, it's been a long day, but here over in Europe, it's heading on towards 10 past 10. So yeah, in the evening.
Yeah, you've had more day than we've had, so
True.
To go first. Yeah, it's going well here. As I was saying before we got on, I just got back from 3 days clergy convocation with the Diocese of the Midwest. So we had time with brother clergy that I haven't seen in 6 months or a year, and nice hierarchical liturgy with my Archbishop. Some very good discussion. We had several presentations from one of the professors from St. Vladimir's Seminary on the reception of converts and why we do some of the things we do, and what are some abiding issues that, or some new issues that have come up given, current situations that the church would do well to address. So I think the Holy Synod will be considering some of those questions. I don't know the details of it. That's above my pay grade.
Well, I don't know how much you're able to reveal, but I'm curious, today's topic will be about masculinity, young men, the ways in which society is undermining them. Was that mentioned at all in your guys' retreat? I mean, I know that I believe the OCA is responsible for the statistic that showed that 75% of all new converts are men under the age of 45.
No, it did not come up in sort of the formal discussions, but my continuing and persistent interest in young men and their well-being and optimizing their lives. I asked every priest that I could get my hands on. I said, so you got an increase in young men coming to your parish. It is universal across the Midwest. In fact, so much so that the Archbishop himself commented and said, yeah, the census of the diocese is up noticeably, and it's because there has been such an influx of people into the church. I don't say this to brag. I have experienced unprecedented growth in my parish since the beginning of the year. I have something like 66 people who have come to my church.
Wow.
And that's some families transferring in from other parishes, to be sure, but a lot of new people moving into the area. I'm, outer ring suburban Detroit, so we get a lot of people transient for work, moving in and out of the area for jobs and all. But there's been stupendous interest, particularly among young men,
Right.
coming to the church, and there's scarcely a Sunday that goes by that I don't have at least one visiting.
Yeah.
I just met an Orthodox Christian from this side of the pond, close to London, is in a parish there. They just baptized 43 people this Lazarus Saturday.
Wow.
43 baptisms, and it's crazy.
Wow. Was that a Greek or a Russian church? Not that it matters too much. I was just curious. And
they're a Russian tradition.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of propaganda in the Anglosphere regards to Russia. That's why I was curious in the UK if people were even converting to the Russian church.
We've had Nazi symbols spray painted on the doors of the Orthodox Cathedral in Copenhagen.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not surprised. My fiance in Germany She recently went to a large gathering of Rocor there in Germany. That was an annual event, and she was highlighting, I think she talked to a few people, how much their church is also growing in Germany, which is fantastic. So seems to be a phenomenon happening across the Western world, for sure. So which again, glory to God for that. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about masculinity, young men, ways in which society undermines masculinity and sort of directs them in an aberrant understanding of who they are and who they should be. Just to get the conversation started, I thought maybe we could begin with your guys' take, because I know both of you work a lot with men in regards to masculinity, developing themselves, achieving their goals, building confidence, getting set and positioned in their life. What is masculinity? How would you guys describe it? I'm sure we'll have some different conceptions, or at least descriptions. And what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century? Maybe it doesn't mean any different from the 17th century, but I'm just curious. I'll begin there. Anybody wants to pick it up?
I'll be the young and ambitious one. Well, certainly to be a man in the 21st century, the new part of it is that it means to be under attack, I would say. So I think it's very appropriate, the title that you used for this video. But what we've spoken about in our talks is that masculinity is that which we love and appreciate about other men when we're in male company. That's what it is. So we define it exclusively as a positive thing. It is something that is obviously can shift and change, but there's also a timeless aspect to it, things that are stable and true and that last throughout time as well, and something that we all recognize without being able to pin it down in some kind of very, very scientific way. But it's something that when we see it, we know what it is. And certainly the words that we would normally connect with the most in the work that I've been doing would be strength, stability, virtue, courage, discernment, wisdom, and perhaps vision as well is something that we also really use a lot. Visionary leadership, I think, is something that's really needed today as well. To be able to see where we're headed and be able to formulate it in a way that other people can understand it and get them on board with that as well. It's like core masculine traits that we appreciate in other men.
Yeah, I can build on that and affirm every bit of it. But for me, the way that I typically put it, it's become kind of a trope with me, is first of all, our masculinity is first of all a gift to us from God,
right?
For which we should be grateful. I mean, it's part of our constitution as his creatures, but as men, but it's something for which we should be grateful. And because we are grateful for what God has given us, we can in turn use those masculine characteristics, those attributes, and those qualities in service to other people. Okay. And that is where mature masculinity begins to come in, because one of the differences between men and boys is that boys consume more than they produce,
right? And
men produce more than they consume, because the traditional things that men are expected to do, to procreate, protect, provide, and preside. When we're providing, we have to provide for our own needs so that we're not dependent on others anymore if we're going to be an adult. But it's typically been understood that men provide more than our own needs require, so that we have more in order to provide for a wife, for kids, to add value, to our employers, even to our churches, to the community at large. And the more that we are able to give of ourselves, outside of ourselves, to others, I think is one of the things that is most highly honored and respected in men. Paul said something that I hear very often. It's very hard to define what masculinity is, but we sort of know it when we see it.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've been trying to take a stab at defining that a little more, and I don't have a firm definition, but there is a constellation of biological, neurological, psychological, and social attributes that go into making up who a man is. There are behaviors and roles in society, but there's also innate inherent characteristics, because we inhabit male bodies and have a Y chromosome, in a male brain,
right?
And the other physical attributes that we carry around with us, they're not just interior states or character traits, but they are also ways of acting in the world that are broadly recognized and appreciated. Despite the fact that, some masculinity sometimes gets a bad rap in the world today, just, wait for the next catastrophe to happen. And suddenly all of those toxic masculine traits are suddenly in rather high demand and respect.
Right.
I remember I was listening, I don't remember, someone podcast something I was listening to recently where there was a man talking about, you remember the last time there was a mass shooting, and all of those husbands and boyfriends and all instinctively covered the bodies, of their women folk, or their girlfriends or their wives or their children. So, women will cover their children instinctually from danger. Men will cover women and children like instinctually. It says we do it. We don't even think about it, And it's just one of those things that probably should be lauded a little more. That selflessness that men give, in service to others. There is, I forget the name of the award. Do you remember the name of that award that they give every year for like people who have died in selfless giving to others, like running into burning buildings, or I think there was one last year, some guy in London jumped into a river to save a woman and her child that had fallen into the river. The woman and the child were saved, but the young man himself was washed away and drowned. It's like, they're always looking to make this equitable and everything, but still like 85% of the recipients of this are all men. Because it's just something that men do, and it should probably be, it's a characteristic of us, but it should also probably be underscored and celebrated, more that it is. So anyway, I'm a little off topic, but the long and short of it is, it's not just masculinity. It's not just a social construct.
Right.
There are biological components to it that make us different from women. But yes, there are performative aspects as well. Some of them are socially conditioned. Yeah, absolutely. And there are social expectations. But at its core, there's something much more there. And that needs to be acknowledged and recognized.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just add one more thing to that? Because now Father Michael mentioned like neurological, biological, all these different aspects, but now I'm not the priest, so Father Michael's here. There's a spiritual aspect to manhood as well, and that's an absolute part of manhood, which doesn't change over time as well. And I heard a podcast on Lord of Spirits. They had an episode called Priestcraft, and for me, that really just like a lot of things fell into place when I watched that. There's something incredibly masculine about priesthood and being a man, which is actually like, showing people, revealing like, divinity to other people, or being that conduit that somehow offers the creation up to God and shows other people God, and that kind of open conduit for that. And that's a really, really masculine thing. I think if there's one aspect that a woman, if I also think of my wife, when we got married, like a large part of it was like she saw like, okay, this man, if I follow him, that will lead me to God. That's going to be a part of my spiritual journey as well. And I think that's a central aspect that men need to understand their priestly role to be able to embody their masculinity more fully.
Yeah, I was going to kind of reiterate the mantra that I've put forward on this channel multiple times in regards to masculinity. I think it connects with what both you guys said, that I believe if we're looking at it at a more philosophical level, that it has to do with the preservation and the maintenance of boundaries and order in society, as I believe dependent upon men upholding boundaries. And where exactly those boundaries are is going to be influenced by your theological and philosophical presuppositions. And so when it comes to being a man and a Christian man, it's obviously going to be tied to virtue. It's going to be tied with, like Father Michael said, the protection of innocence, the protection of women and children, and recognizing that women and children are not operating at the same function in society that men do. I mean, you mentioned that example of the young man who saved the woman in the river, and there's a comment amongst the manosphere and the red pill community about the expendability of men, about men always having to build up their value, which I believe is true. But the expendability, I think also there's something very virtuous that they kind of miss on focusing of a man sacrificing himself for a larger purpose, for the protection of innocent people. And you mentioned the difference in brain structures or psychological dispositions. And I saw recently there was a peer-reviewed study that was getting a little bit of heat from the leftist progressive groups because it demonstrated that children, I believe this was 2 to 4 year old kids, they kind of put them in different situations where a problem would emerge. And the girls typically would begin to fuss or cry. The little girls when an obstacle or something was put in their way that they had to figure out, where the boys would begin to try to problem solve. And so even problem solving itself is about maintaining the order of the world, the order of reality, putting things back into a place of fluidity. And so when we look at, and as we go further in our discussion on the societal attacks and undermining of masculinity, it really is an undermining of order, of logic, of reason, of structure. And this is a satanic demonic spirit that is influencing the world, but unfortunately leading to so many young men killing themselves. Outside of drug abuse, particularly fentanyl, the biggest killer of men is suicide.
Yes. It is the leading cause of death among men under 55 in the United Kingdom currently.
Yeah.
And actually the rates for suicide among young men and young women have both increased substantially since the proliferation of social media. But I think you're right. I think for men it is higher.
And I've said this before, and something that, again, I would say the red pill and the manosphere doesn't really address is, for me and my own development of my own masculinity and self-perception, is it wasn't until I became Orthodox that I felt like I had something worthy to die for. And I really feel like that is tied to the development of a man. And when we look at, you're talking about the suicide rates in the UK, and obviously people are going to point to the nihilism of the world and the lack of meaning. And I think there's something really important to men having something they're willing to die for. I know more secular minded friends that I have that as soon as they had a child, their values began to shift in a much more traditional manner, because now they have a baby, and whether they're conscious of it or not, they have something that they're willing to die for, and they kind of step up into that masculine role. So kind of just curious what your guys' thoughts are on that. There's not a whole lot of discussion amongst the red pill about, like, what are you willing to die for? And when we talk, I mentioned the expendability, which they do highlight all these men that have died in war throughout history.
Okay.
But again, that's about the maintaining of boundaries. That's about having something, your village, your people, your country, your religion, something worthy to die for.
Yeah. Paul can speak as a someone currently engaged with the military with regards to expendability. I know, it's not fair.
Right.
When I first, heard the simplest or the biological explanation of that was put to me one time. Sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive. There's some biological, think about it.
It's true. I mean, a 60-year-old man, as long as he gets a young woman, she can get pregnant. Whereas,
but they're just sort of on a very simple biological way. A woman ovulates once a month. That makes her very valuable. One man can impregnate quite a number of women. So that makes us relatively cheap in that respect. That's no moral argument. And I'm not pushing it, further than just stating the simple fact of it. But you're right. There is an expendability. It doesn't mean that male lives are cheap, but there is a willingness and a willingness on men's part to put themselves. We have greater capacity for taking risk, over women. It's just a common male trait to be much riskier in our behavior. And all of sort of the jokes. Paul won't give this, but us in the United States, it's like, hey guys, watch this. What catastrophe we about to see unfold before us here, but guys will do that.
Right.
And with what was, forgive me, the next one, not only the expendability of, a higher purpose. I think this is one of the reasons why young men are coming to orthodoxy in such numbers. And I would be really curious to see if the viewers in the chat would comment on their own experience, if this resonates with them, that one of the real attractions in orthodoxy is that it provides a real transcendent purpose for young men to serve. That maybe the military is a little tarnished nowadays, sort of patriotism is a bit tarnished in our age. But when people find Christ in his church that has real demands, solid roots, that's got serious structure, high barrier for entry, genuine accountability to a spiritual father. These are things that men crave and that they thrive when they get. And so when they come to Christ, they find this is someone and something that I can give myself heart and soul to. And I think it's one of the real draws that we have for
Right.
young people today.
And when Paul mentioned that, you know, us men revere men when we see masculinity displayed, that expendability dimension is viewed as like a diminishing of value of men in society and how this is a problem. But at the same time, whenever we think of a man in history, it's because he was able to sacrifice his own pleasure for a larger purpose.
Yeah.
And obviously Christ is the ultimate example of that. Nobody would say that he was expendable, but he embodies that what masculinity is, you know. And I think that there's a lot of talk about masculinity, and Christ is rarely ever mentioned as a masculine role model, even though I would argue that many aspects of his life, mission, and the salvific work that he accomplished was absolutely masculine. And that's something that we, whether we're conscious of, really revere in men, whether it be military or people that died in battle, or again, as a father, sacrificing your own pleasure for the maintenance and protection and provisions of your family.
Yeah, Paul, would you speak to this from your experience in the Danish military? Because I'm surely, you know, that
I've been thinking a lot about this over the last year or 2 years or something like that. It's been really interesting seeing here how, you know, the response to the war in Ukraine has been, and the way that where people are reacting. And I've also been thinking a lot about, you know, how NATO and the West is viewing war. And it's very clear that we put our faith in our equipment these days, and all the conversations and all the talk is about all of our equipment and our gear and stuff like that. And I believe that the reason why, you know, we've been losing wars, if you look at Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, the greatest military power in the entire world has actually lost wars to, you know, groups of very under-equipped villagers, you know, mujahideen. But it's been men who have believed in a God, believed in a transcendent purpose. I actually read the most well-known biography by a Danish special service soldier who was in Afghanistan. And he spoke about when he was sent off on his first mission, just before they got on the helicopter, and then a priest came and had to like give them a blessing before they were going. And he just had this revulsion towards this priest coming and giving him this blessing. And he just was like, get away with your tradition. Da, 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 da. And when I read that, it just became so clear to me, like, that's the reason why we're not winning wars anymore, why we've lost this. Because men they're there for themselves. And so this guy today, he's like a kind of like doing the personal coaching for the Crown Prince of Denmark, and you know, it's like hang out with the stars and stuff like that, because he's this big hotshot special services guy. And so we've built a society of individualists, and we've lost this understanding that a man's life has value when he's able to offer it in service, and eventually even, you know, offer the entire of his life. Not just in some kind of abstract way, and not also just in some kind of like final, you know, action movie, something like that. But, you know, very much in every single day of my life, I view it myself as like I'm offering my life to my family, to my wife, to my children, as that's what I'm giving my life up for. And
Right.
and I don't know exactly how fast that's going to happen and what's going to happen with it. But, you know, looking at what's happening now in the West, then there's this massive drive to, first of all, find all of the scandals that they possibly can of harassment and abuse or whatever it is. So we're constantly being told that we have to report each other inside the military. And while this is happening, then there's also this massive drive to treat men and women completely equal. So just 2 months ago now, or 1.5 months ago, conscription has been now made mandatory for all men and women, and men and women are treated exactly identically throughout the conscription process now. So women and men, and in many cases, some cases you still get to sleep separately, but that's not even possible all the time anymore. So in some cases you're just like together, men and women all together. So we're trying. They're driving really hard to eradicate any differences between men and women, but at the same time, pushing people together in this way, and then looking for like this confirmation that like, oh, it's all just about like men raping women and they're like bad and evil and toxic masculinity. You know, and it's completely destroying the armed forces. So, you know, several years ago, the Danish military decided, okay, we need to have one brigade that's ready to go to war with like 60 days warning or something like that. And they've been trying to do this for several years now, and they just can't get the people in. Everything's just falling apart, and the equipment's falling apart, and they can't get anything connected because we're just not ready. We don't have the people, we don't have the resources, we don't have the spirit to do it anymore. So it's very concerning.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment right before you went on there, and it totally ties into what I was going to say about the military. And in the West, I know of Orthodox Christian men that have young sons, about 16, 17 years old, and they're terrified of the fact that they might have to be forcibly enlisted in the United States to fight for wars that they don't believe in, and basically send their children off to the meat grinder of these forever wars. And one of the big differences I noticed between my father, who was a helicopter pilot in the Army, is that he still, this idea that defending your country, fighting in the military, this was always deemed as a incredibly virtuous and masculine cause. But in the 21st century, who wants to, fight for Western governments when they're aiding in the degeneracy and the debauchery that's being spread around the world? And so that's why I think the Orthodox Church is so important. Getting back to something worthy to die for, I don't think, at least for me, and I would imagine for most people watching, dying for one of the militaries of these Western governments, that doesn't seem like something worthy to stand that on that line for. Whereas the preservation of the ancient church, following the ways of the saints, potentially being martyred, protecting your family, your wife, and your children, that seems to be one of the last vestiges where men can actually find some type of authentic meaning and cause to die for. And so when you're talking about the military and this equality of men and women, I view that as an Orthodox Christian as an attack on the Imago Dei, and that it's not that women are lesser than men. It's that due to the image of God, we have different roles. And this idea that we're interchangeable widgets is really a satanic anti-Christian concept on human anthropology and the roles and functions that exist within society.
Yeah, I'll put here in the chat. You reminded me, and I happen to have the quotation handy. The English poet Wilfred Owen fought in World War I in the trenches, with the mustard gas and all of that. And one of his poems, he said, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce decorum est pro patria mori. How sweet and right it is to die for your country. Just as a flat statement, assumed always to be correct. I don't think the wars of the 20th century allow us to believe that anymore.
Right. No, I would definitely second that.
For my grandfather who liberated POW camps in Germany, he was a reinforcement for D-Day, went in the day after D-Day with Patton's army and liberated POW camps. Never talked about it. And I knew a lot who in my parishes have had Vietnam War vets,
right.
Some of the most, wounded men, and even the more recent conflicts. I have in my parish now 2 people with serious issues from fighting in the Middle East and the things that they were required to do and the things they saw. So I'm sorry, that's grim stuff. But
no, it ties perfectly into, because the next point that I was going to bring up is, where do you guys see contemporary society? Where are the attacks on masculinity? What do you see as some of the biggest threats and attempts to undermine young men and their function and traditional role in society right now?
My oldest son is 17 years old. So his biology teacher in school every single week would tell him the only gender that matters is the one that you feel you are. That's the only one that matters. This is his biology teacher in a private Catholic school. So this isn't just like some mainstream state school, even. It's a private Catholic school.
Oh my gosh.
He just dropped out of gymnasium in Denmark. That's equivalent of high school, because he just doesn't feel like he's learning anything there. So he wants to be a full-time entrepreneur. So he's working for, he's doing development work on IT development work. But he just doesn't feel like so the education system has really become an indoctrination system. And
absolutely.
I've just finished reading a whole lot of Father Seraphim Rose. I read one of his books. I started with Nihilism. I actually had a depression for 2 weeks after reading it. It was terrible in some ways. But then I couldn't get so then I had to go like more and more and more and more. So I read.
God.
Like,
Well, don't read the prophecies of the end times then. If nihilism.
Yeah, but that was really like you just saw how it's in it's in the air we breathe in our society, and it really concerns me as well. And how so I have 3 sons, and I'm saying to my wife, like, we need to seriously consider homeschooling.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, how would you feel if so you're talking about conscription in the Danish military? If yours, do you worry? I mean, what are your thoughts on your sons having to potentially fight in these NATO American wars against Russia? Which again,
in World War II, then when Germany decided they wanted to take Denmark, the fight lasted, I think, 23 minutes or something like that. So the Danish professional military, there's this thing, they have this saying like never again. But if something similar happens again, our strategy is like call Big Brother. That's you guys. If the Americans come, then we'll try like hide in a hole until you arrive. If the Americans aren't coming to help us, to save us, the same thing would happen again. We're not going to go fighting any Russians. Like we're a country of 5 million people. We don't have a fighting force of any real kind. So that's the Denmark at the most plays some kind of auxiliary support role. I don't actively think about that. I'm in the Danish Home Guard. My only job is in the Home Guard. I can never be sent abroad. I can only fight to defend Danish territory. So I will never have to fight outside of the country. And so, God help us. I hope I'll never have to do that. But if someone does come to this country to fight, then I'll defend my. I live on a little homestead, and I want to be as ready as I can for whatever happens in life. And I that's been my goal with that training is to be as prepared as I possibly can. And I would like my sons to do that as well. And I don't think we're not like you guys. Like, if you look at the American military presence around the world, it's crazy. Denmark doesn't have that. We are running a camp in Kosovo though still, which is amazing for me. Like, it's like, what on earth are we doing down there? But somehow we're running yeah.
Well, that gets into again NATO's attack on Eastern Europe, Serbians, all that different stuff. But we'll leave that aside.
Yeah.
But here in the U.S., I was just looking at there's like a tracking of flights and planes by tail numbers, and you can see that the U.S. military is amassing large numbers of soldiers up in Alaska. And in regards to some of the NATO powers, they're also moving a lot of people into the Black Sea area, which it seems like building 2 fronts against Russia. And, I've been one of my side obsessions for the last few months has been reading some of the prophecies from saints and elders and listening to people like Metropolitan Neophytos. And, it seems like we're in very precarious situation historically. Right now, and with this globalized technological society and this immense hatred for Russia and really anybody who doesn't want to get on, the central banking debauchery system. And in October of 2024, BRICS is officially going to begin their rollout of their currency, and it's like 40 different countries are going to be there in Russia, and you just think, geez. So many things are accumulating right now. And of course, it's right before the U.S. presidential election where even more chaos we would suspect is going to break out. And it's just really unfortunate.
Yeah. If I can pull away from the political speculation a little bit, which, I have to be real careful in the kinds of things I say and about that. But what can we do for men nowadays? I think if you're not familiar with Scott Galloway's work,
I'm not familiar with him.
Okay, he's a business economics professor at Stern School of Business at New York University. He's been doing some very, very good work recently on men and the situation of young men because he's seen the decline of young men at the university, and I think he's got 2 boys. I think he's got 2 sons as well, and he's seeing their situation. Warning, he is a progressive. And so some of his prescriptions, I disagree with some of his prescriptions, but his description of the problem, I think, is some of the best I've seen in a long time. So if you catch him like on Chris Williams' podcast, you just put in Scott Galloway. He's writing a book on men and young men and their issues right now that I can't wait to see come out. But some of the things that he points out are the decline of young men in universities. We are almost to the point where there are 2 women for every man that's enrolled in the universities. And part of the problem is universities have reduced the number of people that they accept. It's like he went to Caltech or something. He's in California. And when he went to school there, which was granted, 30, 40 years ago, the acceptance rate was like 75%. If you applied, you got in. Nowadays it's like 9%. And the university administration is glorying in the fact that they take so few people, which excludes so many other people from being able to get a quality education. Maybe we need some help for young men in education. Plus, they're not doing well in public schools. They're percentage-wise, there are more female fighter pilots than there are kindergarten teachers that are men. Wow. Yeah. And so it's possible for and half marriages end up in divorce. 85% of cases, kids end up with a single mother rather than with their father. So it is possible for young men to go through their home life, elementary and high school, with hardly any contact with a male mentor, supervisor, or role model. And so, to get men involved, it's one of his things, is get older men involved in the lives of younger men. Is one of his big things as well. And there is this interesting theory, which I'm not sure I'm on board with, but because I haven't quite thought through it. But because boys mature slower than girls do, there's a proposal called red shirting, which means that you start all boys into elementary school when they're 1 year older than the girls do. So if girls start kindergarten at 5, you wait until boys are 6. It will give them a little more maturity in order to do better in academic settings. Like I say, I'm not sure what to think about that, but I understand the rationale behind it, but I don't know if that's really going to work.
I also saw an argument recently that the reason why we have this idea that boys mature slower than girls, it's because our society's become so feminized and the expectations are so feminine. So boys just perform worse at the kinds of tasks that girls are naturally more predisposed to. But it's because we've the system's like, kind of against the guys. So
well, it is. And that's obvious in American schools. What's rewarded? Sitting still, raising your hand, keeping on task, being polite, all of the kinds of things that boys have a whole lot of trouble with. But it's true. Girls are reaching puberty at younger and younger ages now. Boys are reaching puberty a couple of years later. And there does seem to be something, look at a high school girl and a high school boy. The girls are much more mature than the boys are. And Scott Galloway, again, just because I've been listening to him lately, I've been trying to glean some of his best information out because I think he's got some stuff that's really good. He says his biggest, of course, he gets into all kinds of trouble with the feminists and the left because, advocating for men is somehow taking something away from women or persons of color or something like that. He says, no, empathy is not a gendered or a race-based thing. We can have compassion for everybody, and acknowledge the real problems that there are. But he says his biggest fans are mothers. And the example he gives, and he says these mothers, they always write to him and say, listen, I got 3 kids. My eldest daughter, is in PR in Chicago. The younger daughter is at Brown University. And my 19-year-old son is laying in the basement vaping and playing video games.
Right.
And it's more than just a meme.
Yeah.
Right.
In my group, so I'm a group leader in the Danish Home Guard, and we have a girl there, and she's like my star soldier in so many ways. She's so driven and focused and like good at everything that we have to do. But then we went out and did like a kind of training session where we took airsoft guns and got to shoot at each other. And then you just see how the guys they just like have this natural aggression and this, they love it, right? And so it falls to the natural. It's like to attack and assault an enemy position. It's just something that they just do. And she just doesn't have that same ability. So maybe she could train it, but it's just like there's no comparison between the male that male ability, and it's not something that comes out through especially if we're doing like sitting in the inside and doing exercises and map reading and planning missions and stuff like that as well. Like she has this aptitude of being able to do all these things much better in certain ways. But when you just like as raw soldiering, like killing people, that's what the military's there for. This is what men have done for all of history. That's what we've done.